Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today, the top 10 firsts in America's involvement in World War I. World War I was a global battle that lasted from July the 28th, 1914 to November the 11th, 1918. Tens of millions of servicemen from over 30 countries fought on battlegrounds all over the world. Many methods of combat were pioneered in this bloodbath, which ended up killing 16 million people. Technology-wise, it was the first war to see the large-scale use of poisonous gas, airplanes, and tanks. Also, artillery technology and targeting was perfected to rain death on thousands of soldiers. America tried to stay out of it for years, but was pulled in, declaring war against Germany on April 6, 1917. In the video today, we're looking at 10 historic firsts in America's involvement in World War I. Number 10. First soldiers to die in a World War I battle. In late 1917, the Americans took over a portion of the front lines near Artois in France. That same year, on November the 3rd, the Germans launched an early morning raid on US lines. When the dust cleared, 11 Americans were taken prisoner of war and 3 Americans were found dead. They were Corporal James Gresham of Kentucky, Private Merle Hay of Iowa, and Private Thomas Enright of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In the chaos of the German attack, who died first was lost in the fog of war, so the 3 are seen as the first US deaths of the war. 7 months later, Michigan's Private Joseph William Guiton was the first to die in Germany on May 24, 1918. President Harding later honored his grave by saying, "In the name of the Republic, I bestow this tribute on the casket of the first soldier who perished on the soil of the enemy." These men were the first American soldiers to die in World War I, but were they the first Americans to die in combat? Well, many Americans balked at their nation's initial neutral stance. Some, due to their heritage, beliefs, or sense of adventure, joined the militaries of other nations that were involved in the fighting. Some are seen as technical Americans. For example, Harold Chapin was born in Brooklyn, New York, thus an American citizen, but moved to England and became a hugely successful actor before he died during the Battle of Loos on September 26, 1915. He viewed himself as an English actor and English playwright and died as a British soldier. According to writer Gary Ward in VFW magazine, the official publication of the US Veterans of Foreign Wars, the earliest American that died as a soldier in World War I combat was Edward Mandell Stone, the son of a Chicago industrialist. Serving with the French Foreign Legion, Stone was mortally wounded by German shell fire and died on February 27, 1915. The first American to kill a German after formally entering the frontline trenches was Sergeant Major Herbert Slay. Using World War I sniper technology, the US media claimed that he was able to shoot a German from 1,400 yards. The first servicewomen to die in the war were nurses Edith Ayres and Helen Wood, who were both accidentally killed after a Decker gun exploded on May 20th, 1917, aboard the USS Mongolia. The ship was on its way to France. Number 9. First World War I naval death. Osmond Kelly Ingram was just 16 years old when he joined the US Navy on November 24, 1903. When he joined the war, his ship, the destroyer USS Cassin, was assigned to escort American troop convoys to ports in England and France. On October 15, 1917, the US destroyer encountered the Imperial German U-boat SMU-61 off the coast of Ireland. The Cassin immediately pursued the sub, but it was somehow able to let loose a torpedo that breached the water twice. Each time it came to the surface, its path curved, and by dumb luck, it slammed straight into the Cassin. While on the deck of the USS Cassin, gunner's mate First Class Osmond Ingram predicted where the torpedo would hit and, to his great horror, saw that it would ignite some depth charges on the destroyer's deck. Valiantly, he started to throw the charges overboard, but before he could get them all, the torpedo struck, igniting the remaining depth charges and killing him instantly. He was the first US naval fatality of World War I. For his actions, he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Number 8. First artillery salvo of World War I. Machine guns in World War I were the cause of death of many charging soldiers, but most battlefield casualties were caused by developments and innovations in artillery. Some 60% of all casualties were caused by artillery fire. In 1917, when American forces landed in French ports, they did so with little to no artillery of their own. The French stepped up and supplied the Yankees with thousands of artillery and mortar pieces, as well as the ammunition to fire them. When the US forces moved to the front, they brought these guns to bear against the Germans. At 6:30 a.m. on October 23, 1917, Sergeant Alexander Arch of Battery C, 6th FA Regiment, 1st FA Brigade, American 1st Division, shouted "Fire" to the crew manning the French 75mm field gun. This was America's first artillery salvo of World War I. Number 7. First major battle, the Battle of Cantigny. The first US military unit to arrive in Europe was the 1st Aeronautical Detachment under Kenneth Whiting. They arrived on June 5, 1917. The Americans entered the frontline trenches in small groups by the winter of the same year. It took until the spring of 1918 to have enough men to enable the Americans to launch a battle of their own. Men from the famed Big Red One, the US 1st Division, were selected to push the German 18th Army out of the village of Cantigny in France. Among those fighting was the 5th Field Army Regiment, which is the oldest American military unit on continuous active service, as well as Major Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the oldest son of the future President Theodore Roosevelt himself, and of course the First Lady, Edith Roosevelt. At 6:45 H-hour on May 28, 1918, around 4,000 Americans, helped by French manned artillery tanks and planes, climbed out of the frontline trenches and moved towards the German trenches. The Americans and the French tanks carefully followed a deadly rolling artillery barrage that advanced 100 meters every 2 minutes. They quickly captured the village and spent the rest of the battle fighting off German counterattacks. When the dust settled, the advance cost 1,603 American casualties that included those wounded in action, missing in action, taken prisoner, and 199 soldiers who were killed. The Battle of Cantigny is the first major American battle of World War I. Number 6. First air kill. Airplanes were pioneered by the Wright brothers in America starting in 1903. Just over a decade later, aviation technology had exploded, and in World War I, control of the skies became a deadly goal fought over by all parties. The first dogfight occurred just days into the war when, on August 15, 1914, an Austro-Hungarian and a Serbian pilot fired pistols at each other. Soon, the skies became just as bloody as the ground. Like Americans who joined other armies, pilots sought to join the air forces of other nations. In 1916, American pilots formed one such squad, Lafayette Escadrille, for the French Air Service. At its peak, there were 38 Americans in the squadron. One of these pilots was Newport, Tennessee-born Kiffin Rockwell, pictured here. On May 18, 1916, he downed a German two-man observational plane over the Alsace battlefield. He became the first American of the Lafayette Escadrille to shoot down an enemy plane. Later in the year, another American member of the squadron, Gervais Raoul Lufbery, became the first American ace pilot when he shot down the required 5th German plane on October 12, 1916. America finally joined the war in 1917. While waiting for its air force to become active over the slaughterhouse of the Western Front, American airmen would hitch rides on French planes. One U.S. flyer, Stephen W. Thompson, participated as a gunner-bombardier on a French air service plane. While this squadron was returning from a bombing raid over Saarbrücken, Germany, he became the first member of the United States military to shoot down an enemy aircraft when he downed a German plane on February 5, 1918. Number 5. First time Germany attacks the Atlantic commerce. When the First World War started, the British Royal Navy ruled the waves, keeping the Imperial German Navy boxed up in German-controlled ports. Utilizing U-boats, the Germans hoped to reduce the British numerical advantage. On September 5, 1914, Imperial German U-boat SM-U-21 became the first to sink a ship, the HMS Pathfinder, by a locomotive torpedo. Armed naval ships remained difficult targets, so the Germans switched to the lightly armed civilian ships that were supporting the Allied war effort. On October 20th, 1914, SS Glitterer became the first British merchant vessel sunk after it was boarded and scuttled by the crew of Imperial German sub SM-U-17. As the war dragged on, the Germans thought they could strangle Allied commerce by a concentrated U-boat campaign. The SS Prinzenthal Friedrich was a German passenger liner that, in the summer of 1914, on the outbreak of war, was operating in China. She was converted into an Imperial German raider and spent months plying the seas, attacking Allied shipping. Off Brazil, on January 27, 1915, it encountered the American four-masted steel sail ship, the William P. Free. The Germans boarded the ship and ordered the U.S. crew to throw its cargo overboard. When they took too long, the Germans took the crew prisoner and sank the ship the next day. This was the first American ship lost in the war. At the time, America was a neutral state, and they demanded about $5.4 million in today's dollars in reparations. Then the first American death to German commerce raids occurred almost exactly 2 months later. On March 28, 1915, SM-U-28 fired at the British steamship RMS Falaba. The ship sank quickly, killing 104 people. Among those dead was one American passenger, Leon Chester Thrasher, a 31-year-old mining engineer from Massachusetts. His death caused outrage back in the States that would only be made worse when Imperial German U-boat SM-U-20 sank the HMS Lusitania on May 7, 1915, killing 1,198 souls. Out of the 139 U.S. citizens on board, 128 lost their lives. Number 4. First naval victory. By the time the Americans entered the war, the German surface fleet was bottled up in its European harbors. Therefore, the American Navy's focus was protecting the lumbering cargo vessels that kept the Allies supplied. It was while shepherding a merchant convoy off the coast of Ireland that the Americans achieved their first naval victory. On November 17, 1917, the destroyers USS Fanning and USS Nicholson were keeping one eye on the 8 merchant ships they were escorting and the other on the lookout for any subs. At 16:10, coxswain David Daniel Loomis spotted the periscope of Imperial German sub SMU-58. The 2 destroyers immediately engaged the U-boat, firing depth charges and their guns when the sub was forced to surface. The attack disabled the sub, forcing the captain to surrender. The USS Fanning took on board the crew as prisoners of war, as well as 2 dead crew members. This engagement was also the first time that the US Navy had sunk a submarine. Earlier, the US Navy had experienced a difficult kind of first when Imperial German submarine SMU-C-71 sank the first American naval ship of the war, a converted yacht, the USS Alcedo, on November 5, 1917. Over a month later, German SMU-53 sank the US naval destroyer USS Jacob Jones on December 6, 1917. The ship sank in minutes, and of its complement of around 100 men, 66 were killed. The commander, Hans Rose of the German sub, surfaced and took on 2 of the most severely wounded American survivors and radioed the American Navy about where to find the rest before disappearing under the waves. Number 3. First women to serve. Before and after World War I, women were fighting for an equal role in society. Many saw the first step being the right to vote. The first state to allow voting for women was Wyoming in 1889, and it kept that right when it joined the United States a year later. In the 1916 election, intense anti-war advocate Jeanette Pickering Rankin became the first woman to hold federal office in the United States when she was elected to Congress. She voted against joining World War I, and after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, was the only member of Congress to vote no in joining World War II. Women played a valuable part in World War I. On March 17, 1917, Loretta Perfectus Walsh became the first woman to enlist on active duty in the US Navy. She was the first yeoman or yeomanette to enlist in World War I. In addition, she was the first female chief. Number 2. First American Red Cross staff. When the war started, America declared itself neutral, but its people wanted to help those that were impacted by the war. A few weeks into the war, the American Red Cross chartered the SS Hamburg, a German ocean liner that was held in New York. It was renamed the SS Red Cross, and on September 13, 1914, set off to Europe with a cargo of 30 doctors, 125 nurses, and thousands of tons of medical supplies. It was the American Red Cross's first foray into the European conflict. Starting in 1914, and for the next 3 years of the war, the Nobel Peace Prize wasn't awarded to anyone. Then, in the winter of 1917, the Nobel Committee decided to grant it to the International Committee of the Red Cross for its efforts to relieve those suffering during the war. Number 1. First invasion of Russia. Fighting the war for over 3 years exhausted Russia, and by 1917, the nation was coming apart at the seams. Military defeats across the Eastern Front had demoralized the Russian military, while on the home front its population faced famine. Things came to a head when, in the winter of 1917, Lenin and the Communists overthrew the government. After some brutal concessions, Germany and Red Russia ended hostilities, allowing Lenin to focus on crushing anti-revolutionary forces throughout Russia. The Western Allies were horrified that a communist government had taken over Russia, and they feared that Europe's nations, worn down by years of war, might also succumb to the Red Menace. To counter this, Allied nations sent military units into Russia to help anti-communist forces. This is how the Americans found themselves in Russia. While Germany and the Allies slaughtered each other on the Western Front, America quietly sent US forces into Russia. On August 15, 1918, they landed at the eastern Russian port of Vladivostok and focused on controlling the railway between Vladivostok and Nikolsk or Orisky. Another US force was sent to a northwestern Russian port, and this was known as the Polar Bear Expedition. They landed on September 4, 1918. There, they frequently battled communist forces before withdrawing in the summer of 1919. The Americans based in eastern Russia lived miserable lives in a hostile environment for 19 months, well after World War I had ended on November 11, 1918. By the time the last American soldiers left Siberia on the 1st of April 1920, hundreds of them had died in Russia. The communists would solidify their control of what would become the Soviet Union in the winter of 1922. So I really hope you enjoyed that video, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for brand new videos every day of the week. Also, I've got another channel, it's called Today I Found Out, and on that channel we have content very much like this, but we dive into one specific subject in more depth. You can check that out through the icon on the screen now. But if you're looking for something else to watch right now, why not check out another TopTenz video, or indeed a Today I Found Out video over there on the right. And as always, thank you for watching.